Snow skims across the two-lane highway like torn paper, the kind winter rips from the edge of a small Midwestern town and lets the wind carry wherever it wants. The date is December 11, 1993 in Maple Falls, Michigan. 20,000 people, 5 stoplights, a water tower painted like a baseball, is shutting down early. But one place is still awake, the Comet Diner. Fluorescent lights, chrome stools, pies that never cool, and a 19-year-old closing server named Lena Hart who never, ever cuts corners. She waits for a last pair of truckers to finish their coffee, counts the till twice, and wipes the finger, smudges from the pastry case even though nobody will notice before morning. It's the kind of tiny decision you only realize matters when it's the last thing anyone sees you do. The blizzard had blown in fast. By 11:42 p.m., police were radioing fender benders, power crews and a jackknifed semi out by mile marker 94. Lena pulls on her puffy coat, thrifted, patch on the elbow, tucks her red scarf under her chin, and steps into a parking lot already turning to white ocean. From the front window, her manager, Sherry, holds up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. Text me when you get home. Lena mouths, promise, lifts her mittened hand in a wave, and starts across the drifting lot toward the bus stop. She never makes it to the Route 3 bench. This is the spot where our story begins and where, for 25 years, it refused to budge. One small set of footprints, a smear of disturbed snow by the far hedge, and then nothing. In a town where everybody knows everybody's middle name. A person just unthreaded from the fabric. Pause with me on that door as it creaks shut behind her. Now imagine the camera widening, same diner, same neon flicker, same snow swallowing sound, only it's 2019. A cold case detective with a backpack full of new tools pushes that door open. She's here because what buried the truth in 1993, storm, routine, the quiet trust of a small town, can't protect a secret forever. And because somewhere in this case there's a detail that will not age, a mistake. A fingerprint time can't smooth down. If you're drawn to stories where persistence beats silence, where one small piece of evidence can break the back of a lie, make sure you're subscribed. We dive deep, week after week, into cases that never should have gone cold. Hit the bell so you don't miss what happens when Maple Falls finally meets the truth. And if you think you can spot the mistake before the detectives do, drop your theory in the comments. We read them all. Lena's last known minutes were ordinary, almost aggressively so. That's why they worked like camouflage. But the ordinary is exactly where good investigations start, at the edge of a diner parking lot. In a gusting winter that didn't realize it had just become part of a crime scene. The first hours are always the most expensive in a missing person search. That night, they were spent on the Storm, the Maple Falls Police Department. 6 sworn officers, 1 dispatcher, 2 cruisers that hated cold, were triaging spin-outs and downed lines. And if you're imagining some big city command center you've seen on TV, shrink it. Picture a double, wide municipal trailer beside the fire station, wood paneling bowed from old humidity, a corkboard map of town pricked with faded pushpins left over from last summer's fair. Lieutenant Donna Keene, a practical woman who carried 3 highlighters and a squeeze of skepticism in her pocket, fielded the call at 2012 m. Sherry from the Comet. Lena hasn't checked in. She never does that. Her mom says she's not home. Officers Jake Moron and Kyle Foley took the first sweep. It was a foot search because the plows hadn't caught up, because the drifts were well deep, and because some part of you always hopes you'll find a kid hunkered behind a dumpster texting with numb fingers. Their flashlights pushed cones into the white, and found what little there was to find: the footprints that started at the diner door and angled to the bus stop, a wind-bitten scrap of paper from the specials board, a shallow scuff by the hedge that might have been a fall. No drag marks, no blood, no sign of a struggle obvious enough to survive the storm's eraser. If you ask old-timers in Maple Falls when the town changed, they don't point to the factory closing or the year the Little League went state. They point here to Lieutenant Keene knocking on Karen Hart's door at 4:33 a.m. The mother's robe crossed wrong, a second mug left cold on the table, that thin thread of normal life pulled tight and snapping in a quiet kitchen. Keene asked the right questions in the right order. Was there a boyfriend? A fight? A reason to disappear? and heard the answers she dreaded most: no, no, and absolutely not. Lena had savings goals pinned above her desk: community college in the spring, a used car by summer, move out by January if the diner hours kept up. There were reminders to call her grandmother, to buy more dish soap, to return a library book. Everything a life points toward when it's building itself. By sunrise, the search grid was down. Volunteers met at the high school gym, snowmobile guys in neon, retirees with thermoses, teenagers who needed something to do with hands that didn't know where to put themselves. They fanned out to culverts, creek lines, the railroad spur, the wooded strip behind the bowling alley. The state police sent a trooper and a bloodhound named Agnes who worked in loops, nose to snow, tail flagging when she found scent. Strong at the diner door, thinning toward the hedge, then gone, confused, like a radio between stations. The town produced theories the way storms produce drifts. A stranger on the highway, a boyfriend nobody knew about, a wrong place, wrong time with someone who let a small decision swallow a life. Keene wrote every tip on index cards, sorted by location, by plausibility, by look again when the snow melts. But the weather had done what weather does best. It had said, "You weren't ready, and so I will take this from you." The case file grew fat with absence. There were interviews, of course. Sherry at the diner, the truckers. A woman named Paula who said she saw headlights paused by the hedge around midnight, but couldn't swear it wasn't a plow. And then there was the man who lived 2 doors down from the bus stop, the kind of neighbor who shoveled other people's sidewalks without being asked. Ethan Ward, 37, maintenance lead at the paper mill, youth baseball volunteer, steady, polite. He said he'd been fixing a furnace belt that night. He'd heard the wind moan and a snowmobile pass that might have been a truck. He offered coffee to the officers, found the lid to a Tupperware he thought might be Sherry's, and seemed genuinely upset that a girl he'd seen wave from the bus so many evenings could be missing. In small towns, helpful men are a currency. They cash in on trust without ever having to sign for it. Keene noted him in her report and moved on. March came, then mud, then the first soft brave flowers along the south-facing ditches, and still nothing. When the snow finally bled back into the soil, searchers found beer cans, a lost glove, a bicycle bell, a battered purse unrelated to anything but a different sad story. No scarf, no body, no crime scene. The Comet diner replaced the cracked stool third from the left, turned the missing flyer sunward on the glass, and kept brewing coffee that cooled under neon. That's how a case goes cold in a place like this. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, persistent return to normal that doesn't fit right but fits enough to bear. The file got a thick elastic band. Lieutenant Keene retired in 2002. A new chief came in with a new map and a grant, writer's optimism. Lena Hart stayed 19 on the bulletin board. What nobody knew then was that the case didn't freeze, it cured. The truth was still there, waiting like a photograph left in developer too long, the image darkening slowly, patiently, until one day the edges would be impossible to ignore. The person who finally reopened the door was not from Maple Falls. Detective Area Sullivan came with a Detroit zip code and a calm that made people talk. She wore scuffed boots, carried a black backpack that looked like it had been everywhere a good story goes, and spoke to small-town cops the way a respectful guest speaks to hosts who've kept the porch light on too long. 2019 had delivered a federal grant for Michigan cold cases, new lab capacity in Lansing, new software, funds earmarked for evidence preservation that had already saved a dozen stories from falling apart. Sullivan asked for boxes that hadn't been touched in a decade. Maple Falls sent 3, each labeled, Hart Lena, in a hand that belonged to someone now dead or moved to Florida. She set up in a borrowed conference room at the county. Fluorescent hum, coffee like burnt toast, a long table that had seen school board disputes and turkey sandwiches, and she read. She didn't skip to the photos or fast forward to the best theories. She read the whole thing in order, because time has a way of hiding the truth behind its own paperwork. She traced the route from the diner door to the bus stop with a highlighter. She circled every mention of hedge. She underlined. Then Ward offered coffee and expressed concern, not because it meant anything yet, but because patterns begin with the most boring kind of repetition. The evidence bags were older than some of the officers in the building. Brown paper, the ink on their labels feathered with age. Sullivan handled them like something alive and asleep. One held the red scarf Lena had worn that night, recovered from her room, not the scene. Another a single mitten found behind the diner dumpster in April. 2 water logged in 94 to mean anything then. A third. Tape lifts from Sherry's car where Lena sometimes caught a ride. Back then, labs had looked for blood, fingerprints, fibers you could see with your eye. Now, a sneeze from the next room could be game changing if it landed on the right thread. Sullivan made a list for the state lab with the precision of a surgeon's scarf ends, mitten cuff, uniform hem inside seam, tape lift fainty 3, hairbrush from Lena's dresser for comparison. She added one more item nobody had sent in before. The paper coin rolls from the diner till, bagged for prints in 93, stored and forgotten when they didn't match anyone. Skin cells hide in cardboard too. While the lab got to work, Sullivan walked the route. Not the Google Maps version, but the way a 19-year-old on a freezing night would have moved. Head down, shoulders in, mitten up to guard the cheeks. She timed it. She lost the sidewalk where the wind piled drifts even on a calm day, and stepped into the street the way you do when you know your town. She stood by the hedge and tried to be the wind battering a kid into a bad decision, and then tried to be a person who noticed that kid. What can you see from each porch? Where would headlights stall if a driver needed to think? Where does snow pool in a way that hides footprints? Questions are a detective's best soil test. She met Sherry in the empty diner between lunch and the dinner rush. Sherry's hair had gone silver and her voice had found the lower octave people get when grief becomes part of their rib cage. I still call her every winter night in my head, Sherry said, drying a mug that didn't need drying. I still tell her to text me when she gets home. Some stories calcify into angles, good kid, bad night, worse luck. Sullivan wanted edges rounded by time to be sharp again. When the lab called, it wasn't with a miracle. More like a door unlatched. The scarf ends had a mix of DNA that shouted noise, Lena's, Sherry's, her mom's from a hug. The mitten was a mess, too degraded by melt and spring bacteria. The tape lifts offered nothing helpful. But the inside hem of Lena's work uniform, taken from her closet, bagged because Keene had bagged everything, yielded something extraordinary: 3 skin cells, likely from contact close in time to the last wear. Male. Partial profile strong enough to build a genotype on. Strong enough to ask the next question, does this live in CODIS? Sometimes the answer comes back like thunder. This one came back like distant footsteps, not an exact hit but a familial lead. A close relative sitting in the database for a 2007 felony burglary in Wayne County. The software flagged a likelihood the unknown male whose cells rode into storage on Lena's uniform was probably a first-degree relative of the man in the system. A brother, maybe. A father. Sullivan unwound the family tree, starting with the Wayne County name. That man had a brother in Maple Falls in 1993. That brother's file popped like static on a winter radio. Ethan Ward, helpful neighbor, furnace repairer, coffee offerer, little league guy with a swing analysis nobody asked for, clean record except for a Dewey in 2002, pled down, married then, still in town in 2019, working parts for a farm equipment dealer out on the highway. This is the moment investigations live for. Not the gotcha, not the glare across an interview table, but the quiet, almost private realization that the map you've been looking at might be upside down. The person who organized one search party after another might have been searching to make sure people found nothing. Sullivan didn't celebrate. She called the prosecutor. She scheduled discreet trash pulls to collect fresh DNA the right way. She warned the team that small towns are loud when you make them whisper. And then she waited for the lab one more time. A week later, the cell scrapings from Ward's discarded coffee cup matched the unknown profile from Lena's uniform with the kind of statistical power juries respect. Numbers don't solve motive, but they solve the question of touch. He had touched the uniform she wore the night she vanished. What good investigators know is this: evidence doesn't give you permission to stop asking questions. It gives you the obligation to ask better ones. They didn't knock with cuffs out. Sullivan scheduled a follow-up interview at the station, the kind that lets a suspect walk in with dignity and talk his way into trouble without neighbors leaning over fences. Ethan Ward arrived in a jacket zipped too high, a man who had practiced casual in the mirror and overshot. He made a small joke at the front desk about parking tickets. He asked for coffee. He looked at the cold caseboard on the wall and then pretended he hadn't. Sullivan started where Keene had started in 1993, "Walk me through your night." Ward's voice took on that thin, reasonable tone men use when they need to be believed. He'd been home. He'd tinkered with the furnace. He'd shoveled. He'd seen snowmobile lights, or maybe a truck's, across from the bus stop. He'd offered coffee to the officers, and wasn't that what you were supposed to do? Help. Help is a habit, Sullivan said, conversational, almost kind. It's one we're grateful for. But we ran some tests on Lena's uniform. The one she wore that night. Your DA is on the inside hem, Ethan. Explain that to me. A good interview room does two things at once: it shrinks the world and lengthens time. The hum of the camera, the scuff of chair legs, the knowledge that silence is speaking in permanent ink. Ward said, that's impossible. Then, she was a good kid. Then, lots of people touched her uniform at the diner, laundry, coworkers. Then, I might have hugged her at some fundraising thing. Sullivan didn't argue facts he could wiggle through. She asked a question that looks soft and isn't. Did you ever invite Lena inside just to warm up? You were 2 doors from the bus stop. The wind was bad. A decent person might have done that. There are moments when the room itself seems to lean toward an answer. Ward's eyes flicked to the corner where the camera lens peers. He swallowed. A vein in his forehead made a small decision to be obvious. I offered, he said finally. She said she was fine. She kept going. And yet your deny is on her uniform, where hands go when someone tries to keep someone from leaving. Sullivan slid a photo across the table, not of Lena, not of Ward, of the red scarf, a benign object made ominous by time. Then if something went wrong and you panicked, there's a difference between that and a plan. The line between accident and intent is where men like Ward try to build their house. He put his hands on the table, palms down, as if showing he wasn't holding anything, now belatedly. It was cold, he said. She looked like the wind was taking her. I told her to come in. I made cocoa. I told her to wait it out an hour and I'd drive her home. She said no. She stood up fast and I reached out. Just to stop her from going back into the storm. She slipped. She hit the coffee table corner. There was blood. He paused, like a man hoping the room would fill the rest of the sentence with mercy. Confession is not a light switch. It's a dimmer someone's hand shakes on. Ward cried the way some people cough quickly, as if embarrassed by the body. I didn't know what to do, he said, and in that moment you could hear both the human and the predator, braided so tight you couldn't separate them without a scalpel. There was snow. So much snow. I put her in the truck. I drove to Gray's quarry. The water's deep even in winter. I thought by morning, no one would know how she fell. It would just be the storm. The map on the wall of the interview room shows the quarry like a blue thumbprint an inch outside town. In 1993, searchers had stood at its chain link fence and said, we should drain it. The way people say, we should fix the schools. The equipment cost alone killed the idea. With the confession recorded and the prosecutor looped in, a judge signed the warrant that finally turned Gray's quarry from rumor to scene. Dive teams arrived with sonar that can read the bottom like Braille. The first passes showed ordinary quarry bones, shopping carts, a safe cracked from the backwash of a bad marriage, tires, the geologic boredom of silt and stone. On the fourth grid, the image appeared: lines that don't belong in nature, the shadow geometry of a pickup. They brought up the truck over 2 long days. Time had made it a reef, rusted, furred with freshwater mussels. Beneath a sediment layer they found what the Hart family had needed and feared in equal measure: human remains with red fibers caught against bone. Fibers that matched the scarf still hanging, these 25 years later, on a wooden peg in Lena's room where her mother had left it because moving it felt like treason to hope. Mourning doesn't stop because paperwork starts. Karen Hart sat with Detective Sullivan while the medical examiner's office explained its part with careful nouns. The remains were Lena's. The cause of death: blunt force trauma consistent with a fall against a hard corner. The manner of death: homicide. Because someone else's hands had made the fall possible and the concealment certain. Sullivan did what good detectives do when the evidence hurts as much as it helps. She told the truth in complete sentences, then left room for silence that had earned its right to be loud. Ethan Ward was arrested in the driveway he'd shoveled so many winters he'd worn a groove to the mailbox. Neighbors watched from windows, faces bent into the glass, seeing two stories at once: the generous man who fixed their leaking faucets and the man who had kept a mother awake for 9,000 nights. Cuffed, Ward looked at the camera again. Smaller now, recognizing the lens as the first eye he couldn't charm. There is a particular kind of shock that runs through a small town when the villain turns out to be the helper. It's not just fear, it's vertigo. If we were wrong about him, what else are we wrong about? Maple Falls would spend the next year answering that question in church basements and grocery lines in city council meetings where people ran out of breath before they ran out of feelings. Courtrooms don't restore what was taken. They do something colder and necessary: they measure it. The Calhoun County Courthouse smelled like old wood and winter coats the morning Ethan Ward stood for arraignment. The charge: second-degree murder, with additional counts for tampering with evidence and obstruction. The defense asked for a narrative that would sting less: a tragic accident. A panic. A man who made the worst possible choice in the worst possible moment and then told himself a story he could sleep inside for 25 years. But confessions recorded in clean audio make poor pillows. The gnaw on the uniform hem, the familial match, the coffee cup confirm the quarry, the truck, the fibers, the way he'd inserted himself into the search to steer it away from water. Each piece might have been survivable alone. Together, they were a door with too many locks for one key. Maple Falls watched the hearing the way a person watches their own chest rise and fall after a scare. Sherry from the diner sat behind Karen Hart, one hand on the mother's shoulder and the other touching her own elbow as if to keep herself from floating off. Lieutenant Keene, retired but still brisk, took a front row seat and brought the same notebook she'd carried in 1993. A row of former Little Leaguers, now men with hairlines and strollers, looked stunned to hear their coach's name said with venom. Sullivan did not testify at arraignment. No need. But she watched the way a carpenter watches a house during the first storm, listening for groans. Later in pretrial she would lay the case out in the plain language jury's respect. No embellishment, no guesswork dressed up as conclusion. Just the chain contact, injury, concealment, lies, pattern. She'd explain how storms take evidence but leave physics. How a fall like Lena's needs force and angle and the geography of a room someone else chose. She would resist, with professional stubbornness, the narrative that reduces a homicide to just happened. Ward's attorney filed the motions defense attorneys file, suppress the confession as coerced, challenge the DNA as contaminated, discredit the quarry search as overbroad. The judge read the transcripts, listened to the tapes, reviewed the warrants signed on fresh probable cause, and wrote an opinion that had the force of a doorstop. The confession stood no threats, no promises, a clear advisory of rights, a defendant who spoke freely and at length. The DNA stood collected, stored, tested under protocols designed because old cases matter. The quarry evidence stood, a search built on a roadmap the defendant himself drew. With trial looming, the prosecution made an offer that balanced the scale without breaking it: plead to second-degree murder. Accept 25 to 40 years, tell the full truth in court so the town doesn't have to invent a softer lie. Ward conferred with counsel, did the math of birthdays, and decided to trade the slim hope of acquittal for the narrower calculus of guaranteed time. Plea day was cruel and kind by turns. Karen Hart read her statement like a person who has learned to carry a heavy object without tipping it. She didn't talk about monsters or mercy. She talked about ordinary things. The sound of boots by the door that never came again. The text she still sent on the first snow every year: home yet. The way she had kept Lena's room as a museum, not because she couldn't let go, but because she wouldn't let absence be the only thing left. "You took a life that was going somewhere," she said, not looking at Ward because the truth didn't need him. "You took the rest of my life and bent it around the gap." Ward stood when the judge asked him to speak. His voice reached for contrition and sometimes found it. "Never meant," he said, and then stopped, the sentence refusing him because the room had heard the tape where he explained how he'd meant every hour after. "I'm sorry," he settled on the cheapest coin that still circulates in American courtrooms. The sentence dropped like winter. 25 to 40. Plus years for the cover, up to run concurrent, because the law nods at tidy even when grief knows better. He would be eligible for parole in a world where the Comet Diner might be condos, where Sherry might have learned to sit for an entire meal without looking toward the door, where Maple Falls would have new missing posters for new families and a new detective with a new backpack opening boxes too heavy for their size. Outside, microphones waited. Sullivan did a thing good detectives rarely get credit for. She stepped aside so Karen could speak first. The mother said the one sentence that contains both victory and defeat. "We found my daughter." Then she went home to a room with a red scarf on a peg and sat on the bed and let the quiet be loud for a long time. The press asked Sullivan about science, about CODIS, about progress. She said yes to all of it, and then said the part that matters most: someone kept everything. Lieutenant Keene bagged a hem no one else thought mattered. The evidence tech who didn't cut corners on a slow Friday. The lab that stored things right even when budgets were thin. This case was solved by people respecting the future before they could imagine it. There's a lesson there for every department that thinks old boxes are dead weight. They're not. They're seeds. They don't all germinate. But when one does, it feeds more than the family. It feeds the town's belief that truth is a renewable resource. After cases close, towns try to resume their shape. Maple Falls found it couldn't fit the old outline anymore. Trust wasn't gone, it was more complicated. The Little League board instituted background checks, not because they thought there were more Ethans waiting in the dugout, but because procedure is how you respect what you've learned. The diner added a closing shift buddy system, not because they blamed Lena for walking into weather, but because safety is the kind of ritual that protects without punishing. Detective Sullivan boxed the file again, this time with a new label and a different kind of weight. She wrote a memo she sends to every chief who asks how to start a cold case unit when all they have is a floor fan and a promise. It reads, in part, "Photograph every box before you open it. Log who touches what. Treat every thread like it will be read by a future that knows more than you. Visit the scene even if the scene is now a pharmacy. Ask the mother what she remembers and then ask again, because today she'll recall a thing grief hid yesterday. Don't fall in love with the villain who volunteers. Don't fall in love with the victim either. Fall in love with the work." She drove out to the quarry one last time. Winter had skinned it in gray, a color that refuses to commit. A chain-link fence wore new "No trespassing" signs, earnest at being too late. She thought about how many cases die at the intersection of bad weather and good intentions. She thought about the way water keeps secrets and how, given the right set of tools, it also tells them. She tossed a red wildflower into the wind. It blew back against the fence and clung there. A stubborn, small insistence that memory can be both soft and sharp. Back in town, Karen Hart did the bravest thing grief asks. She moved the scarf from its peg to a cedar box lined with tissue. Not to hide it, never that, but to put it where hands could touch without breaking the past. She started volunteering at a hotline the county funded, after 3 other cases used Maple Falls as a cautionary tale: call when you're worried, and we will believe you soon enough for it to matter. Sometimes she picked up to a teenager whispering from a bathroom. Sometimes to a father learning that love and control are different words. Sometimes the phone stayed quiet and that too was a win. Sherry retired the spring after the sentencing. On her last night, the Comet filled with people ordering more pie than they wanted and leaving bigger tips than they could afford. The staff gave her a shadow box frame with a paper menu, a photo of the old neon, and a red ribbon pinned like a promise. Text when you get home. They wrote on the back in 4 colors of ink she did. From a couch that finally knew her weight. As for Ethan Ward, the state moved him to a facility 2 counties over. The docket entry on the Department of Corrections website is clinical. Almost board height, weight, offense, earliest release date. Somewhere a prison chaplain knows the way his voice catches on guilt. Somewhere a caseworker has heard every version of, "I'm not a bad man." None of that belongs to Maple Falls anymore. The town conducted its portion of the ritual and handed the rest to a system built for long, slow arithmetic. And Lena. Cases encourage the past tense, but people like her resist it. In the recordings, friends say her laugh could kick a door. Her notebooks say she wanted to study early childhood education. Her tips jar says she could make $5 on coffee alone if the lunch crowd was kind. Her mother says she had a way of pulling mittens tight with her teeth. The story says she was 19, then she disses found, then justice as we do it was done. Before we leave Maple Falls, step back into that first scene for a second. The parking lot, the neon, the storm saying hurry, to everything with a pulse. What's different now isn't that we can prevent weather or stop every bad decision. It's that we can look longer, hold tighter to the pieces that look like nothing, and refuse to let the helpful mask absolve the harmful hand. If this story moved you, share it with someone who thinks old cases only get colder. They don't. They get heavier until someone strong enough picks them up with new tools and stubborn hope. Subscribe if you want more investigations told the way the work feels patient, exact, human. And if you're here because you lost someone to a winter that erased too much, we see you. Keep calling. Keep asking. Sometimes the future answers.